You're listening to Scoot Closer, brought to you by Resting Rage Face Media. Welcome back to episode 2 of Scoot Closer. In today's episode, we are going to begin tackling a major theme of our show, which is the untapped economic potential of the women's health market. We're going to hone in on a very specific example today about the women's wellness visit, or our annual exams, and the archaic practices leveraged in those exams. Later on in today's episode, we're going to interview Zoe Cruikshanks, who is a co-founder of Revin, a startup that is reimagining the speculum, and we'll learn about what inspired their product and how they're trying to improve both the patient and the practitioner experience.
Before we dive into business and our interviews, we just want to say thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. Thank you for sharing the stories that you have and for all the outreach that we've had. This last month, we've connected with so many smart and established individuals in the space who are building products, who are running grassroots advocacy, and generally just being badass. We are so excited for the connections that we're making and for all the guest speakers that we have coming up so we can all learn about this space together. As we've been chatting with people have been asking us, why are you guys doing this? Like, what's your background in this? And truly, it is just something that we're passionate about. We find ourselves Googling and trying to figure out all these like ailments that we have and talking to doctors and advocacy that we have to do for ourselves. And a lot of times we feel like we get generic responses or generic therapies, and not something that's a little bit more targeted. So the goal is really to go on our health journeys together, to do the parts that we're doing silently in our homes out loud together. So that's really, why we're doing this.
I agree. I've just loved seeing everybody's reactions, their stories and their experiences tell us things that they're working on that they're stoked about, because it's helping us realize how much activity there is in this space. And I actually think that's a really good tie into some numbers I saw recently online. So Amboy Street Ventures is a venture capital firm, and they are focused on specifically investing in the women's health space and in the sexual well-being space. They came out recently with a pretty explosive report called the Ghost Market Report, and many of you have probably already seen whisperings of this online.
I've seen it all over my LinkedIn. I've seen it on Instagram. It's been cool and timely with us launching our podcast that we're starting to see more of this. So yeah, tell us what they found out.
They came out in their study to say that the untapped potential of the women's health space in terms of being a goat market in terms of being
greatest of all time. It is.
Greatest of all time market. In terms of being a ghost market, it's an annual missed revenue of $360 billion.
$1 billion a day.
Essentially, yeah. That's $1 billion a day that we are missing out on by not investing in this space.
And innovating, and not only investing, but innovating in this space. There's a demand there.
Totally. And that's the whole point. The ghost market terminology comes from describing a market where there is urgent demand and a totally insufficient supply. And it really describes the women's health space pretty well, because we know it's an untapped place for potential right now. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the underinvestment in this space is a huge theme of our show. And today we decided to start with kind of a more general example that almost all of us have experienced, which is our annual visits to the doctor, the women's wellness exam. And, we actually want to talk about why are these practices so archaic today? Why are they underinvested in, and what's being done to make it better?
And speaking about the wellness exam or the unwellness exam, a lot of you guys were really excited about the name of the show. You said that it resonated, and that was really where this came from. It came from the nervousness of sitting on an exam table in your doctor's office and maybe having your feet in stirrups and hearing, okay, scoot down, scoot closer to the edge of the table, scoot closer. That's the whole point. We want to reclaim that nervous energy and we want to bring it to our podcast. So we're going to talk about the wellness exam today and what innovative tech is out there in addition to new guidelines that have taken place for when it comes to these wellness exams.
Seriously, I like anytime a doctor tells me to scoot closer and I'm already at the edge of the table, I'm like, where do you want me to go? Like, do
Like
you
pretty
want me
much
to
off the
suspend?
table.
Yeah, like, do you want me to like use
Do
my
a bridge.
core? Yeah,
Yeah.
and like suspend my bottom half
Yes,
in
I
some
don't know.
magical way for you. It's insane. But we were talking about this and it's kind of weird. I was trying to think back to my first wellness exam. I don't remember it. I remember many different wellness exams throughout life, but I cannot remember the very first
I know.
experience.
You and I talked about this, and it's almost like I remember subsequent ones, but that first one, I have blacked it out. I'm really trying to think back to like what age, like any of
No, I
that.
have no
And I
clue.
just have zero recollection. So I literally, we've blocked it out because
Yeah.
it was
Maybe
either
traumatic. I don't know.
traumatic or something that we just didn't want to think about again. I have no idea, but it's just, it speaks volumes to what's happened to our
Yeah.
memory around that.
Yeah, totally.
So we're gonna talk about the speculum today because that is a big part of the wellness exam. And the man who invented the speculum, James Marion
Man.
Sims, the man, he is also touted to be the father of gynecology. He made some advances. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. But I want to tell you something that he wrote in his autobiography. And I quote, "If there was anything I hated, it was investigating the organs of the female pelvis." This is the man who is the father of gynecology, and he has invented the speculum, and he hates the female body. That is not inspiring confidence in me.
James Marion Sims, whatever the fuck your name is. You're a bastard, and may you not rest in peace.
We know he's done good things for gynecology, but to write that in your autobiography is diabolical.
It's diabolical. I actually don't. I mean, this is like we need a psychologist to explain this to us. Is like, why did he even bother when he hates us so much? Like, who made you?
He felt compelled, obviously, to get in this space, but then to go and write that and like that's what
Yeah.
you're leaving us with is just not. It's not making me happy.
All right. So back to the wellness visit. We're going to learn a little bit more about the history behind this stuff, but this is kind of embarrassing. I didn't know this until I started researching for this episode, but we learned like the pelvic exam and the pap smear are not the same thing. Did anyone else
Yeah.
think they were the same thing?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe the listeners are better than us, and maybe we're just like clueless, and we're like, okay, we're here, we're on the table, do what you must. And
Yeah.
we just don't know what's going
I'm
on.
going to disassociate and
I'm gonna
like try not to think
disassociate.
about it. Yeah.
100%. So why don't we talk a little bit about what the purpose of the pelvic exam is and what the purpose of the pap smear is. The pelvic exam is to check for your reproductive anatomy. It looks for signs of infection, cysts, fibroids, sexually transmitted infections, and general physical abnormalities. The purpose of the pap smear is to detect abnormal cervical cells before they become cancerous. So the pap smear was invented in 1928, and at that time, cervical cancer was one of the leading causes of cancer death in women. So the pap smear in the 1920s was added as part of your standard screening. And then get this, you guys, the minute that they started screening for cervical cancers regularly, the cervical cancer rate dropped by 70% due to regular screening and preventative methods and being able to catch some of these things early on. 70%. That is such a mind-blowing statistic for me to walk away with.
I think just speaks to the opportunity in this space of how can we make this procedure accessible to people so that they're getting screened and we're preventing cervical cancers from happening.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the freaking speculum. So both of these exams are typically done with that diabolical tool.
Dun,
Anyone
dun,
who's
dun.
experienced it, it is something that should come with its own like horror music every time you see it at the doctor's office. But basically its purpose is to help widen your vaginal canal and help your providers, like Ankita was saying, visualize your cervix and your vaginal walls. And during the pelvic exam, they're doing some things manually, visually on the outside of your body, and then they use the speculum to start looking at the vaginal walls and the cervix. Even though these are two different exams, while you are cranked open with the speculum, they need access to your cervix to perform a pap smear. So while that speculum is inside of you during your pelvic exam and they're visualizing things, they're also going to use that opportunity to scrape your cervix to take a sample for the pap smear. And they do this by using one of two tools. One is a spatula, and they use that to scrape the outer part of your cervix, or they'll use a cyto brush, which is like a small mascara wand that they rotate inside of your cervical canal, to get the cells from deep inside. And I'm like cringing because
Yeah. Yeah.
your cervix is full of nerve endings.
Yeah.
Your cervix is full of nerve endings, so you are reasonably in pain or discomfort. And this is so stupid of me, but when I was younger and I was going through pap smears for the first time, I thought that they were using a Q-tip. I thought that they were just taking like a swab of my body. And I remember thinking, damn, am I like this weak that I can't handle like a cotton swab?
Yeah.
And then when I learned that what they're doing is actually taking cell samples, I was like, okay, well, I wish somebody had explained that to me.
Yeah. So it's important for us to understand that these are two different exams because there are two different tools that are being used during this exam, and we innovate on them separately. So the pelvic exam, the cold duck lips, we're going to call them, that is something that is used to visualize inside the vagina. And the scrappy tools like the spatula and the mascara wand, those are used during the pap smear to collect cells to check for cancer and or HPV.
Duck lips, scrappy. I think I got it. Okay, so I mean, I feel like the true villain for me of the wellness visit is the speculum. You might be surprised to learn that it was invented in the 1840s, which makes the speculum a 185-year-old tool. Mm-hmm. I was thinking to myself, what else was invented back then so that I can have a sense of like the span and change of technology over that course of time. Here are a couple things that were invented 185 years ago. The typewriter, the sewing machine, the rubber band. I actually can't believe the rubber band is that young. It just seems like an ancient thing. Postage stamps, and even the term feminism first began to appear at this time. So honestly, in that list, apart from the rubber band, which like I don't think has been revolutionized and shouldn't.
No notes.
No notes. You're perfect the way you are.
The speculum, lots of notes.
We have so much feedback for you.
Yeah.
Each of these things, they've gone through several evolutions, and yet the speculum is totally stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about the man that invented it, James Marion Sims. He invented this duck lip shaped device, and he tested it for the first time on enslaved Black women without any pain therapies or anesthesia given to them, as he was even performing surgeries and stuff with the speculum. There are probably a lot of medical advances that have happened not only on enslaved people, but marginalized people, even just in general, the population under pain. And I think that is something that we want to dive into for later episodes.
Yeah, this is a much bigger topic, and there's a huge theme here related to pain management and prejudice that exists today in our healthcare system and is a result of the early history of how some of these medical developments were created in the first place. We're going to save it for a future episode, but I think it's really important that we take that detour to acknowledge the speculum has a dark history. The creator has a dark history. And the idea that pain is inherent to how women are treated and how we experience the world, that's a really common thread in our healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Shraddha, tell me, all of the things that you mentioned that were invented 185 years ago have seen some sort of evolution in them. Why do we think that the speculum has not seen some evolution, revolution, something?
I wish I could say it's because this problem is so complex that we just haven't cracked it, but like we have been to the moon. So I just think that's a really poor excuse. The honest and sad truth of it is that there's medical inertia in this space. There's underfunding in women's health. There's totally a normalization of discomfort and pain in general for women's health. There's also regulatory and adoption barriers that prevent us from refreshing old practices. I don't know how much we get to just blame general inertia versus gender bias for this one. Inertia makes it sound really passive, and gender bias is an active choice in a lot of cases. So I think we have to stare that truth in the face if we're going to move forward and tackle the solutions and think about them in a more humane way for people that are getting treated. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer that's like, well, this is a really tough nut to crack. I don't think it is. I mean, not to minimize the work people are doing. I'm saying that we haven't been paying attention to it, and now we are.
And you know what? Fear not. That's the whole point of our podcast. We want to bring in front of all of us different therapies and different products that are being innovated. There are plenty of tools on the market. It's a matter of funding them. It's a matter of getting them widely adopted. So one of the first ones that I want to talk about for the speculum, it's called Yona Care, and it's basically an angled handle design. It doesn't require you to scoot all the way down the table, and it's lined in silicone instead of metal, and it's also redesigned for comfort and ease. So while it has a similar look to the speculum, it's been redesigned in a way to be a lot more comfortable. So I think that it's, important to show you that even if they look the same, doesn't mean that they are the same.
Totally. And even just those slight differences already make something seem a little less scary to use. So, you talked about the substitute to the speculum. I want to talk a little bit more about the substitute to the pap smear because, again, that's a different exam. Now, taking a step back, we actually have learned that HPV is thought to be responsible for more than 90% of cervical cancers. So if you can test for HPV, which is an easier test to run than a pap smear, then you can hopefully capture 90% of the viruses that cause cervical cancer and get that early detection. HPV screenings are a really powerful tool to be used along with pap smears. And we know that because of the discomfort in pap smears, a lot of people avoid them. And so it's really critical for us to have better alternatives.
I just want to highlight that there are vaccines out there that are approved up to the age of 45 years old that make HPV preventable. And it's not just the tooling that's in front of us. It's also the vaccines and different drug therapies that can make a difference.
And the FDA has approved 2 self-collection offerings for HPV screenings. They're from 2 companies called Roche and BD. The self-screening has to be used in a healthcare setting. So at a clinic or a doctor's office, you can't take it at home, but you're just running a swab on yourself. You're not using stirrups. You're not using a speculum. You're not actually collecting a cervical cell sample. You're just doing a swab inside of your body in order to do an HPV test. And already that's an amazing advancement so that you can get early detection of what is the majority driver of cervical cancer. Now, since pap smears check for more than just HPV, they're screening for all abnormal cervical cells, it's still important that you get that exam. And there are some really exciting alternatives being developed today in this space. There are 2 companies called Teal Health and Caliscope that are offering softer wand-like self-directed tools that go into your body and collect the cervical sample. They're like a large tampon that you're inserting that releases this swab inside of your body. Teal Health was given a designation by the FDA called FDA Breakthrough Device. It means that it could potentially be fast-tracked in the future for approval. And Caliscope is in its early stages of clinical trials. So both of these companies and tools are really trying to make progress to make this more available to the general market soon. There's another advancement on the pap smears that's much earlier stage, but I just thought had a great story behind it. There's a nursing professor at the University of Michigan. Her name is Marilyn Filter. And she was thinking about, how scopes are used in different parts of the body for different types of procedures. And she was like, why can't we apply scopes to vaginal and rectal exams to make them more comfortable?
Mind blown. Like, honestly, we can stick scopes up, up heart valves and shit, right?
Yeah.
How are we not able to do that for much larger openings? And make it less invasive and just make it better. It was when you brought this up, I was just like, this is crazy. And
Yeah,
why are we just now thinking of this? Like, this should have been a standard care of procedure years ago, decades ago,
totally.
even.
Marilyn Filter is a genius.
Thank you.
She's essentially developed a smaller tool called the FemScope Calm Collect system. And it's a slim cell collection device that has a scope, and it would, again, entirely replace the speculum and the swab that's typically used. You wouldn't have stirrups involved. One thing I love about what this nursing professor is developing is that she's thinking about the end-to-end adoption of this, because a lot of arguments you'll hear is people saying, well, we don't want to train up our entire medical staff on an entirely new procedure. And those are some of the barriers to entry that we face today. But with this new tool that she's developing, providers can learn and be trained on it in less than an hour. It's a smart device, so it connects to your smartphone or computer, and you can basically just get the results digitally pretty quickly after you do the exam. This team,
Crazy.
her team that's developing this at the University of Michigan, they are on their way to completing a pilot study, and then they're going to move into full clinical trials. So they're still also early stage, but there's some exciting buzz around this FemScope Calm Collect system that Marilyn Filter is developing. And we are so grateful for you, because what an amazing invention.
Where do we get to sign up for the early adopters list?
I
'Cause I'm
know,
in.
seriously, I'm
Yeah.
in.
It's so exciting to learn about the new tools that are entering the wellness space for women. We also want to talk a little bit about the new guidance that has come out on pelvic exams. So currently they are annual if you are symptomatic or pregnant. Otherwise, back in 2018, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology updated their guidance to say that pelvic exams don't have to happen without reason. It can be a conversation between patient and doctor, depending on the symptoms that you're having, what your history looks like, and then they can decide whether we need to do a speculum pelvic exam or not. So I think that that's great I think that it's great that the guidance on these things also gets updated. So let's also update the tools on these things. Like, there's no reason why we can't revisit the speculum or the pap smear or our HPV tests. I don't want us to be more enraged, but I do have one other sort of ancillary study. There is also the prostate exam that is obviously for men. And recently they developed a test where you could test the saliva along with the blood test that takes place for the prostate exam, so that you don't have to have potentially a digital exam as your first path towards figuring out whether or not you have prostate cancer. They have not developed a spit test for the cervical exam. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. I am not in the research field, obviously. And I don't want to say something out of pocket here, like about medical advances. But I get this feeling that it feels like the prostate exam maybe is invasive. And so, like, let's figure out ways for things to not be invasive or not be uncomfortable or painful. Why are we not thinking about that the same way for the cervical exams? It is also invasive. It is also painful and traumatic in its own way. And there's something there that, you know, maybe I need to dive a little bit deeper into the medical reasons as to why there are not less invasive ways of checking the cervix. But I feel like if there's less invasive ways of checking the prostate, that we should have that same grace for the cervix.
I agree. I think we need to be thinking outside of the box when it comes to women's health. And thankfully, there are all these people out there that are starting to innovate in this space. And now that we have dug into the wellness exam and the archaic practices and the potential new technologies, I need to know, like, why the hell aren't there more solutions like this? Why aren't these things already out in market? Why aren't they getting all the funding? Why is it so hard to even find the ones that we were looking for in our research? So let's find out more. We'll be right back with our interview with Zoe from Revin on what their experience has been like as a startup in the women's health and medical device space.
Hi, Zoe. Welcome to the pod. We have Zoe Cruikshanks from Revan, and they are working on a new speculum design, and we're super excited to have you on. Zoe is a co-founder as well as a VP of operations. So, Zoe, we'd love to hear about what the story is behind Revan and how everything got started.
We started Revan, me and my 4 other co-founders, when we were in our final year of our engineering degrees, and we were tasked with improving a device that had blatant human factor concerns. And so we kind of sat around humming and hawing about which device should we pick. And it wasn't until Josh, the one male member of our team, he actually witnessed a gynecological procedure that was done on his partner. And he just saw this device in action and saw how uncomfortable she was and just didn't want her to ever go through that again. And so the next day he came and proposed improving the speculum to us, and we've been working ever since there. So it's just over 2 years now that we've been working to improve this device.
That's amazing. Josh, thank you for standing up for us. Scoot in, scoot closer. We love it.
Ally.
Exactly. So as you did some of your initial research, what were some of the things that you were hearing from your patients?
So initially we learned that there wasn't really a ton of research, and so we ended up running our own study where we surveyed over 600 patients, asking them about their experience with the speculum and with these procedures. The main pain points that we realized after performing this study was the opening mechanism, whether it be the loud noise, whether it be the pain as the blades open or pinching as the blades close as they come out, were the main pain points that patients were experiencing. And the kind of shocking stat that we learned was that 42% of the people that we surveyed are actively avoiding or delaying any procedure involving the speculum. So that includes all of the preventative cervical cancer screenings that are just not happening because people are so scared of this device. And I think part of it is the stigma, whether that be, you never hear people talking about their good pap smears, you only hear when they're painful or uncomfortable. But there's also a cultural stigma. There's also the stigma of practitioners that are not well trained in how to perform patient-informed consent procedures. And so there's layers to all of this that we uncovered as we performed our own company research.
One of the things that we talked about earlier in the podcast was that once they started screening for it, the HPV cancer rates dropped drastically by 70%. And so the fact that people are actually skipping the exam because of discomfort or, PTSD around this, it's just so important for us from our health perspective to make sure that we make this a comfortable experience and that, patients are still showing up and going through these screenings.
Yeah, cervical cancer is almost 100% curable, whether that be with radiation, and especially if it's caught in the early stages. Of all of the cancers to get, that is one that technology and innovation has really come a long way to cure that cancer and make it so that if you catch it in the early stages, it's not life-threatening. But the thing is, when people are avoiding these procedures, it can become really deadly because you just aren't catching it in the early stages.
That's why we love the innovation that you guys are creating. It's great.
So you brought up the cultural barriers and differences that make the procedure challenging. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you were seeing in research or stories there?
Most of this has been through stories. I wouldn't say it's through formal research, but one kind of shocking one that was we were working with a mentor, and he used to run a medical clinic in the UK, which was a highly Muslim population. And in his own realization was we never performed this procedure. I think part of it was the fact that the doctor may have been uncomfortable and didn't want to do this. Another part was that the women weren't asking for it. There tends to be, even related to any kind of women's health and, the vagina and those kind of procedure, those are kind of just words that carry a lot of stigma. And so that care tends to go by the wayside just because it involves those triggering words or an uncomfortable procedure or things that aren't talked about amongst, family and friends.
It's not a kitchen table conversation.
It's not a kitchen table
we're
conversation.
Not hey, I had a speculum exam today, go me. Maybe we should be celebrating it, but it isn't a kitchen table conversation. And I think that perpetuates the stigma that we have around it.
Absolutely. I think that education around these procedures can be a huge way to ease the anxiety of people. And so, hey, I had this procedure. Here's exactly what happened. So
Yeah.
just talking amongst the kitchen table with your friends, with your family, saying, hey, have you been checked recently? And the other thing is that how we can make it more approachable and make it a more common experience.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the device that you guys are creating and also a little bit about what stage the company is at?
Yeah, since our initial prototype, we've done about 5 major kind of iterations, obviously taking into account patients' feedback, but also practitioners' feedback, as they're really the ones we have to convince to use this device. Even if every patient in the world wanted it, they're not the ones buying it at this current point. And so we really wanted to remove the moving parts. After we did our survey, we realized that that was the big scary point. So we looked to other kind of intravaginal devices, and we looked to the menstrual cup, and we wanted to design our device out of silicone. Not only is it softer and more flexible, but it also has that temperature neutrality, so it doesn't have that cold shock upon insertion. We based our device off of a menstrual cup, so it folds and then is inserted, and after it's inserted, it opens up, and then it continues to be inserted until it can kind of cup around the cervix. And then there's a shaft that goes down, and so that samples can be taken, the practitioner can see in, but essentially it doesn't need to be cranked open because the pressure of the silicone can move the vaginal walls out of the way. Another feature of our device is that it has 360-degree coverage of the vaginal walls. And so sometimes there's modifications that practitioners have made depending on the different body types. Due to the two-blade design opening, there's like a gap in between the top and the bottom, and the vaginal walls can actually collapse into this, and this is oftentimes what causes the pinching. As they're trying to close the blades, the vaginal walls have collapsed in there, and that's what gets pinched. So the modifications that practitioners will make, they'll sometimes put a condom with the tip cut off to try to help keep that. They'll use, popsicle sticks or other swabs to push the canals out of the way. But with our device, none of those modifications are necessary because there's no way for any vaginal tissue to be pinched with our device.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. That is like one of the hardest parts, definitely, like you said, about the exams. But can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you have with getting funding and getting medical devices in front of practitioners?
There's a few barriers to entry when it comes to bringing medical devices to market. The first is just kind of the increased timeline. And so you really want to make sure that when you're bringing a device to be used on patients, that device has gone through all of the proper, whether it be sterilization, whether it be safety. You really want to minimize the risk because nothing would be worse than having your first experience go poorly. A big thing within women's health is the lack of phantom models and any way to test women's health devices just because they haven't been created before. Like with pacemakers, there's tons of animal models that can be used before we go into human trials. But with the kind of gynecological and cervical model, there's none of those phantom models that can be created.
Do you mean like in animals that
Yeah.
the speculum essentially can't be tested?
Yeah, and just like the anatomies are innately too different, just kind of in the size of the cervix and the way that the cervix is aligned.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the investor space and how they perceive investing in these types of devices. You talked a little bit earlier about the ROI. Do you feel like they understand the market size? One of the things Ankit and I were talking about earlier in the show is just the large untapped economic potential of women's health. And it really leaves us questioning, why aren't people seeing that potential? So I'm curious what your observations have been there.
I think that people are definitely realizing that this is an area that has been untapped for so long. You'll see on a lot of VC funds that they have taken an interest to women's health. It's such a wide market, and you're absolutely right, it has a large untapped potential. The thing that we've come up against is two things. One, that a lot of them are looking for later stage companies, so Series A funding and beyond, whereas we're in the stage where we're seeking pre-seed funding. And then also in terms of the timeline to investors getting a return is just longer when it comes to medical device market. Not only is there the regulatory side of things where you need to clear whatever jurisdiction you're planning to sell in, there's also just the design and development of any hardware that takes a significant amount of time. Like for our device, we will need to go through a variety of biocompatibility channels to make sure that the silicone is safe to be in the vaginal canal. All of those things need to go through external testing. We eventually plan to include a camera technology with our device so that they can monitor the cervix over time, which we think can be a really big value add to anyone who uses our device. So there's just a lot of R&D and a long timeline, whereas if you look at like an AI company or some other kind of tech companies, they tend to just have a faster return on investments and ability to scale at a higher rate. We've seen, between 5 and 15 speculum designs that have been attempted since 2002, I believe, was the first one that, got FDA clearance. But no one has ever had any of them used on them, and that we've heard of, at least in any procedure. And the people that we've spoken to, even in the practitioners we've spoken to, they've never even seen a redesign.
Oh man, that's crazy. Wow. Like, we talked a little bit about the speculum being designed in the 1800s, and then it took till 2002 for us to say, okay, let's get back to the drawing board and redo the design year. And the fact that we have been, 20 plus years that they've been trying to redesign it, but the adoption is failing somewhere along the way.
And oftentimes it's because what already exists is so easy to manufacture and so cheap, and it, in the eyes of the practitioner, it gets the job done. And so that's been a big thing that we've come up against, is just how can we be different? And so by integrating that camera technology, we're trying to expand the market for where our device would fit in, instead of just being like, hey, we're a one-to-one replacement for what already exists, just at a higher price point. So we want to try to integrate this camera technology to, not only is it offering advanced patient diagnostic information by the ability to monitor conditions over time. I mean, your cervix changes what it looks like depending on where you are in your cycle, and they try to get you to come in for your pap smear in the middle of your cycle, but your cervix can look different at all of those different points in time, and that is oftentimes why there's these high rates of false negatives within cervical cancer screenings. If you had the ability to be like, here are your last 5 cervical exams, this is what your cervixes look like, we've tried to bring increased functionality, increased accuracy, so that the upfront cost of our device can really be justified with those other features. And that's how we're approaching the adoption market.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. It sounds like you all are taking a very data-driven approach to trying to up-level the device. So we've talked a little bit about adoption in the clinical space, and you are, in the pre-seed stage, so probably years away from broad scale adoption, but are you now starting to work with physicians? Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's been like?
I think the physicians, at least the ones that we've spoke to, obviously you have some who are kind of negative and say, oh, I already have something that works. But there are a lot of physicians that are ready for innovation in this space. And so we've kind of signed on 6 physicians who, once we're at a stage where our device can be sterilized, they're willing to go through with testing. So that's our big push this summer, is to get our MVP to a stage where it will be fully safe to test on any patients. But I think when we speak to a lot of these physicians, if you look at them compared to their other counterparts, whether that be in cardio or in neuro, and they see all of these innovations coming through their sectors, and obviously part of it is that their industries are more accustomed to an increased amount of new tools and new technologies. But I think that we're seeing from some of these physicians that they want to be in on the action. They want to also be trying new things. And if they can see that their patients are uncomfortable for these procedures and there's an option for something better, they want to try to improve that. So I think gynecology is just one of those industries that hasn't really seen a lot of innovation or a lot of change. And there's definitely a good number of the physicians that we've spoken to that are open to this change and want to participate in this.
That's great. That's so exciting to hear that there's energy to make changes here. Zoe, we loved hearing everything about Revan and your perspective on this space. What would you like our listeners to take away from you today?
If you're interested in seeing the Revan progression, we're on social media, whether that be Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok. I believe we have a TikTok. I might need to check on that. That's not my side of things. If people want to stay engaged and stay up to date with us, LinkedIn or Instagram are probably the best places to reach us. And you can see our device as it evolves and as we keep bringing in more physicians and more technology and hopefully improving this care for everybody who needs it.
Well, I can't wait until Revan is in market, or even sooner. You can count Ankita and I in as early adopters.
Amazing.
Yeah, sign us up. But we're just so excited to hear that there are people that are just totally changing up this space. It needs a breath of fresh air, and it's been so lovely to talk to you, Zoe. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no, thank you guys as well.
As we wrap up, Ankita, what's our call to action? What's our takeaway from today?
All right, my favorite part. So our call to action is for everyone to speak up at your next wellness visit. Ask them about what newer tools are available in place of the speculum. Ask if they have a smaller speculum. ask them if they could warm it up or use lubricant to make it a better experience. Speak up if you have discomfort. Ask for a moment to collect yourself if things are not feeling right. We don't need to suffer through something and be uncomfortable just because we've done it in the past. And for investors, our call to action for you, there's a $360 billion industry waiting to be innovated. Please get your piece of the pie. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or inspiration that you'd like to share, please reach out to us at hello@scootcloser.com.